Welcome back, Wonders. It's Naidra. Wishing everyone a happy holiday and also hope everyone's having some time to relax and just kind of settle down. For today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys my favorite Sorceress build that I've been using so far, and it's been really good from level 1 to 50. In fact, I'm a little bit over level 50 right now, and it seems to be pretty OP'd and able to take down pretty much everything that I've encountered so far. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and show you guys how the build works, and then we'll dive deep into it as well. Before we do jump into it, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please don't forget to do so. Go ahead and click that button below. It would really help me out. And so with that said, let's go ahead and dive right in. So there are a couple of different ways to use this build depending on what level you are at when you're putting this together. If you're around level 50, you're going to be able to really take advantage of all of the different mechanics that I'm going to show you guys here today, which is super fun to play. If you're not, you're still going to be able to do a lot of damage. You'll still be able to progress pretty quickly, so don't worry. But as you continue to level up, you will start to be able to gain access to having additional powers and additional things that'll make it that much more fun. And so this build specifically is a Frost Stormweaver build. We're going to be using Frostbolt most of the time. We're definitely going to be using some curses. And then if you have Frostwall, that's also going to be super helpful as well. In a later version of this build, we're going to switch over to Eye of the Storm. But until you get to that level, we're going to be using Cold Snap pretty frequently, which is going to shatter your enemies, or you'll also be able to explode your Frostbolt, dealing damage from afar. When you're going up against enemies that are a little bit more powerful, we want to try to maintain a little bit of distance. So the first thing we typically want to do is use Frostwall so that we can keep them further away from us as we then cast our curse and then start to unleash everything else on them. So without further ado, let's take a look and see exactly what that means and what that's going to look like. All right, so let's put up our Frostwall first. We'll curse them and then we can start exploding them with Cold Snap. And then otherwise, if you're from further away, you can also use your Frostbolt. And the main purpose of our Frostbolt really is just to freeze our enemies so that we can shatter them afterwards. You don't always need to use Frostbite. That really is mostly helpful when we're fighting against bosses or enemies that can take a little bit more damage. That's just going to increase the amount of damage that we can do to them so that we can one-shot them a little bit easier. But that's not something that you need to use all the time. The other thing that we do have on our bar is Lightning Warp. This is so we can teleport over to our enemies, but this really doesn't become available until a little bit later. And that's because the main use of this is just the teleport, and that we can't really do until we can start using Ball Lightning. That's how we trigger that teleport. So while this is really fun and great to have, it's not going to be useful in the beginning stages. In the beginning stages, especially when you're below level 20, you're mostly just going to be using some of these basic attacks. And like I said, once we get to Cold Snap, that's going to be really helpful. And then the other one, if enemies have a little bit more health, is also going to be Frost Bomb, which actually does quite a bit of damage. And so again, let's see if we can get another quick demonstration here real fast. So we'll activate our Frostwall if you have it. If not, Frost Bomb is fine. We can toss out some Frostbolts, but otherwise these enemies will be getting taken down pretty quickly, and most of the time we can do this from a distance too, so you really don't have to get too close. While this character can be pretty squishy, if you're not close enough to the monsters to take damage, you really don't have to worry about it, but we do have ways around preventing that squishiness. Specifically, we want to work on some energy shields so that we can create some defensives for ourselves and also some armor, which we'll take a look at the gear here as well. So again, just as an example, if we're far away enough, we can use some Frostbolts to try to freeze them. If you don't have your Frostwall, your Frostbolt's going to be doing quite a bit of damage, but Frost Bomb is really where a lot of that damage is going to be coming from in the beginning stages. And my favorite thing to do right now is Cold Snap. And if you didn't already know this, which I'm sure most of you guys already do, your Frostbolts can be exploded from a distance. So if we want to, we can also use that as another source of damaging our enemies from far away. So now that you see how that works, and again, you can use this in any combination that you like, depending on what level you are, but all of these are going to do really great damage. But the key idea here is to make sure that we're trying to get our enemies frozen as frequently as possible, because that's going to help with the defensiveness, and that's also going to help with your overall damage as well. So let's go ahead and go back to town and let's take a look and see what exactly is making this work and how we're able to make this such a high DPS build. The first thing is we'll start off with our gear. Now, because this is a early game build, it's not going to be heavily dependent on gear. So I don't really expect you to have all of this stuff right off the bat, especially if you're just starting off with the game. However, there are a couple of things in here that are going to be more important than others that I'll point out to you guys, and hopefully you'll be able to get that on at least some of your gear, but you'll still be able to make this build work without necessarily having all of this stuff. It might not be quite as effective in the beginning, but you should be able to get the rest of the stuff as you get closer to that level 50. So the first thing we have on here is our wand. This is one of the most basic ones that you can get, and you can get this around level 22. You can upgrade this quite a bit if you want to. Ideally, I'd like to get a legendary wand, so I didn't spend much time upgrading this guy. But the key points here that you want on your wand is going to be increased spell damage. We want to have some maximum mana. That's what's going to allow you to be offensive and also defensive as well. So extremely helpful to have additional mana. And then the other thing on here is because this is a Frost Stormweaver build, we do want to have plus to our cold spell skills if possible. These are the three main things that you can get on your wand. Like I said, you can increase this by adding additional modifiers to it if you have the ability to, but if not, these are the three main ones that I've been using and have been working really well for me. The secondary weapon we have on here, we never use. It's just there just because I don't want it to be blank, but not overly concerned with this. Similar idea though, this does have plus to mana and +3 to all cold spells. So if you'd like to, you can, but I find that using a one-handed weapon with a focus is a little bit more helpful. That gives us more modifiers overall that we can have on our build. The other thing we're using is this wicker tiara, which again, this is something that you're probably not going to be able to get in the beginning of the game, but if you can find something that's going to give you increased energy shield, that's going to help you with your defensives. And then if you can get plus to intelligence as well, that's going to be great. One of the things I do recommend having, especially in the beginning, is increased chance of getting rare items. That's going to help you get better gear as you continue to progress through the game. The thing is, at this level, you're going to continue getting new gear all the time. So again, it's really not that important that you have every single one of these pieces that I'm showing you guys, but if you want to compare it to what I'm specifically doing, I'll still kind of go through and show you. And then on the right hand side, we have our twig focus. The important thing to see here is going to be the increased spell damage. And then this also helps us with recharging our energy shield, or at least gives us a chance to. And plus it gives us a little bit more maximum to our energy shield as well. This can really be used in any combination. So if you have something else you'd rather use instead of this, intelligence is going to be good on here. Increased spell damage is good on here as well. And then if you can get some increased mana on here too, would be really good. Looking at our rings for the first one, so here's one of those things that does have increased rarity of items found. Believe it or not, it does make a huge difference in the items that you're getting, having that increased rarity. So if you can get this on as many pieces of equipment as you can, I think that's going to be the best way to go. The other good thing that we have on this specific piece is the evasion rating, and also we're getting plus 81 to our mana, so I think that's super helpful. And then there is some equipment on here that does require a certain amount of strength, and so throwing that onto one of your modifiers is super helpful so that you're not having to take away from your passive skill tree. For our other ring, similar idea here. We've got plus 27 to mana, which is really helpful as an implicit stat. And then on top of that, we've got evasion rating, we've got some mana, we've got some life as well. The only thing that's kind of missing on here is the rarity of items found, but all of these stats are going to be really helpful, especially for the beginning game. And as you can see, this is only a level 8 requirement, so this is something that pretty much anyone should be able to get. It's probably not going to come with this many modifiers right off the bat. I have added a couple of these manually, but again, really helpful. The only thing that could be better is having all of these things with a higher amount of life and a higher amount of mana, but at this point, it's still super helpful. For our amulet, this also has plus 15 to strength as an implicit. This is really helpful again because we do have some equipment on here that requires more, but I think you probably are starting to notice a pattern by now. We've got some increased spell damage on here, we've got increased maximum mana, and then the additional attributes also helps all of our attributes all together, so that's really good. And then looking at our actual armor itself, so this one is a new piece that I just put on recently. This gives us high evasion ratings, and it also gives us quite a bit of maximum life as well, which is really great. We don't really care too much about the rage at the bottom, so this is something that's really not necessary. In fact, having a rare item would probably be more helpful with this because you likely would have more modifiers on it, like some additional mana as well. So if you have one that's got plus to mana, even plus to intelligence would be really good. If you have sockets on here that you want to use, and just a disclaimer, if you put a rune into any piece of armor that's got a socket on it, you cannot remove it later. So hopefully you're sure that that's what you want. But if you're going to put anything in there, I think the one I'm using right now is really helpful because it gives us increased armor, increased evasion, and also increased energy shield. So overall, it's covering those defensive bases. And we certainly do need some defenses with this character, especially because, again, this is a sorceress, which means just like anything else, it's going to be a little bit more squishy. But we can try to make up for that in a few different ways, including these runes. For our gloves, we are using these firm bracers here, which has got some good evasion rating. It's got plus 20 to mana from the rune that we've put in there. And then we are also getting some additional freeze buildup, which is really helpful for this freeze build. It helps us freeze our enemies a little bit faster, which means we can use cold snap more frequently, and also prevents us from taking as much damage. It definitely freezes bosses quite frequently as well. So I think that's super helpful to have. For our belt, we're using something that's got high armor. So we've got plus 124 to implicit armor, and then we've got an additional plus 45 to armor from a modifier. We've got some lightning resistance on here, which is really helpful. The life regeneration and the stun threshold isn't really that helpful for this specific build. So in this case, if you can get plus to mana, or if you can get plus to maximum life or intelligence, would be really good, or even plus to rarity items found. But none of those things are required to make this work. It just would be a little bit more helpful. And then lastly, for our boots, we are using these Gamble Sprint and Boss boots, which are really great for a few different reasons. One is we are getting some increased evasion rating, quite a bit of increased evasion rating, which is super helpful. We're getting some dex, lightning resistance, but the most important thing about this specific piece is that we're getting the increased movement speed is random, and this changes every time you get hit. So it can go anywhere from 0% up to 40% increased movement speed. And I tell you, there is nothing more important at this point than having that increased movement speed, because this lets us evade a little bit faster, and it also allows us to get away from those bosses. Now, it does appear on the top left-hand corner when you get hit, it tells you what your increased movement speed is, and you really do feel the difference. So if I can say, out of all of the equipment, if there's something that's the most important to have for survivability, it's going to be this increased movement speed. If you don't have these, that's fine. Even a 20% constant increased movement speed is going to be super helpful. But when you put your boots on, if you have a choice between increased movement speed and any other stats, I would always recommend having that increased movement speed. It is so helpful, and it will save you in so many different situations. And so that's the most important part about this. But like I said, the evasion rating is also really helpful too. And then lastly, for your charm, the one that I use most frequently, and I do swap these out depending on which boss I'm facing, the one that I use most frequently is the thawing charm. This prevents us from being frozen and gives us some immunity to that. There's nothing more frustrating than getting frozen and not being able to move. But I do swap this out, like I said, depending on what kind of boss I'm going up against, and especially if it's something that I'm expecting to be a little bit more difficult. So that's what our equipment looks like. All right, so looking at our skills, and some of these things, again, will come at a later level, so you may not necessarily have access to these right off the bat. If you don't, that's fine. Make do with the ones that you have. They're going to be just as powerful until you get to this point, so no need to worry about that. But when we're looking at our skills at the later point of the game, you're going to be using Cast on Freeze. This is really helpful because this will allow us to trigger our ball lightning, and that's what allows us to teleport using our lightning warp. So really helpful to have that. And then we're also going to use deceleration for the added support gem. And then lastly, we have impetus in here as well. For frost bomb, like I said, this is something we're using frequently, and this does quite a bit of damage. It especially will help with bosses because they have a harder time avoiding this. But for this guy, we are using second wind. We're also going to be using strip away. And then lastly, we're going to be taking spell cascade for the support gems. For our frostbolt, we are taking glaciation for that increased freeze buildup. We're also using cold penetration to help with cold resistance, and also scattershot, and that's what's allowing us to spit out 3 frostbolts at a time, and also allows us to use cold snap more frequently as well. You won't be able to get Comet until a little bit later on in the game, but once you do, it is super helpful. It is really slow to cast, but it does do a tremendous amount of damage, and it also freezes your enemies. So when you have an opportunity to do this, especially while your enemies are frozen or if you're at a further distance away, this is going to be helpful. We're going to pair this up with Unleash, and then Arcane Tempo, and lastly, we're going to use Inevitable Critical for this so that we can try to get in a little bit additional critical strike damage. For Cold Snap, we're taking Concentrated Effect, and we're also going to take Energy Barrier. And in the beginning, instead of using Cast on Freeze, we are going to be using Arctic Armor, and this really does help for many different reasons. One of those being that it does freeze enemies when they get close to you and they use melee attacks, so that's super helpful. But it also does additional damage as well. So definitely something that we want to use until you get Cast on Freeze. And then once you get Cast on Freeze, we're going to swap that out so we can get additional damage, and also helps us out with the Lightning Warp technique as well. We're going to pair up our Arctic Armor with Clarity and also with Deep Freeze. And then if you already have Frost Wall, again, Frost Wall is one of my favorite moves that I've used so far in this game. I think I like it because it creates that distance. Like I mentioned, it freezes your enemies. It does a lot of damage. That was something that I was not expecting to see at first, but it does do quite a bit of damage on top of freezing and also creating that distance. So I absolutely love this attack. I paired this one up with Spell Echo, as well as Frost Nexus and Ingenuity. And then for Lightning Warp, I haven't added anything to this. I mainly am just using this just so that I can teleport, and also for that shocking effect. When we shock our enemies, we are also going to be dealing more damage to them thanks to our passive skill tree, which we will take a look at momentarily. You can add some support gems to this, but right now I don't have anything that I see that really would help me take this further than where it currently is. And then lastly, for our skills, we have Hypothermia. This is especially helpful with bosses. While it does take up quite a bit of mana to use something like this, it really helps with the cold resistance, or takes away cold resistance from enemies, allowing you to deal that much more damage to them. You will notice a significant difference of using Hypothermia and then attacking your enemies and not having this. And for this, we are going to be pairing this up with Magnified Effect. We're also going to be using Ritualistic Curse and wrapping it up with Heightened Curse so that we can increase the effect of our curse skills. So that's what our skills look like. Before we wrap it up, the last thing here is going to be our passive skill tree. So like I mentioned, we are taking the Stormweaver Ascendancy, and so far I've only completed 2 of the Ascendancy trials. However, you want to try to take all of these if possible, but in the beginning we're just going to go all the way down to the right hand side here so that we can take the Elemental Storm, which will cast on its own automatically, which is really great to have. And then also we want to take Rain Dancer so that Elemental Storm has 150% more cooldown recovery rate, meaning it's going to cast more frequently. And for our tree, we're just going to go straight up here, stopping at the Open Mind node here. And then we're also going to be taking Raw Power and Pure Energy. And then we will make our way over to Dampening Shield before then we cut out over to the left, making our way all the way up to Exploit the Elements. And then we'll start heading over to the right, where we're going to be taking Potent Incantation. We're also going to take Zone of Control, and then we will wrap up this right-hand side by taking Echoing Frost and Echoing Thunder. For our attributes that we're taking on the board, a majority of these are going to be intelligence. The further on you get in the game, the more intelligence is going to require for you to use certain things like your wand or your focus. So these will be crucial. In fact, even your skills will require a certain amount of intelligence to use. So you're going to probably need to take a majority of these for intelligence. However, some of them you can grab some dex or some strength with, depending on what your gear looks like. But we will make our way up, and then on the left hand side we are going to take Overexposure for now. We will be changing this a little bit later, but up until 50 or even 60, these are going to be the most helpful. On the right hand side, we're also going to take Climate Change, and then we will make our way all the way up to the top, where we're going to take Chilled to the Bone, Inescapable Cold, Endless Blizzard, and also Glaciation. And then lastly, we also have Whispers of the Doom to apply additional curse. This is helpful. And then we're going to continue to make our way over to the right. But at this point, if you're using this up until level 50 or level 55, you're not going to be able to get much further than this. So this is what the passive skill tree will look like. And also, I am going to link the planner below. So if you guys would like, you can just go back and check out the planner as well, or feel free to rewatch the video over and over. I certainly will not be mad at that, but I'll also attach the planner for you guys so that you can take a look at that below as well. With that said, that's what this build looks like currently. Like I said, there's a lot of wiggle room with this in terms of how you can use the build, depending on the level that you're currently at that point, but it is a lot of fun to play. It's definitely been one of my favorite Sorceress builds to play. I have tried a few different ones, and this one seems to be the most effective. It helps with offensive, defensive, it keeps you away from danger, and even though you're squishy, you still have the ability to progress pretty quickly with this. So definitely a super high DPS build. Seems a little bit OP to me. I'm sure as you get further on into the game, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, so we'll take a look and see how we can tweak it. But I absolutely love this, and I think you will too. So with that said, that's all I have for you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you guys liked the video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. That would greatly help me out. And again, thank you guys for joining me, and I hope you guys have a great holiday. Until next time, Wonders.